Good afternoon, everybody. I am Rabbi Boxman. This is our final session of our Between the Lines series. And I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get into this very special session. One is a reminder of raising your hand. You can either do that physically, but the better way to do that is actually virtually by scrolling over your name or going to the participant list and raising your hand virtually. That shows me very clearly who is raising your hand in the order in which you've raised your hand. We will make sure that we'll pause throughout the session to collect questions. Another way you can direct questions is through your chat box. And you can direct all of those. I think it's set up that they all come to me. So if you prefer to write out your question instead of saying it out loud, you can simply put that in the chat box. I think that was all the housekeeping. I'd like to turn it over to Susan Pittleman, who will introduce our special guest for this afternoon.
Thank you, Rabbi Boxman. I'm delighted to welcome our special guest, the author of Stars of David, Abigail Pogrebin. Abby is no stranger to our Naples community. Many of you met her when she spoke about her book, My Jewish Year, at our Jewish Book Festival in 2018. Last year, Abby and her mother, Letty Cotton Pogrebin, were the featured speakers at our People of the Book event. I've stayed in touch with Abby by listening to her thought-provoking podcast about the weekly Torah portion, Parsha and Progress by Tablet Magazine. When I wrote to Abby to tell her that we're going to be offering this virtual book discussion based on Stars of David, she responded that she'd like to pop in. So here she is. Welcome, Abby.
Abby's on mute.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
It's hard to be Jewish and muted. I just want to thank Susan and everybody in Naples and Rabbi Boxman for having me and for reading the book together. It's so meaningful, and particularly during this time when we've all been so disconnected. And I don't have to tell you that, you know, our Jewish DNA is all about connection and communal activities and events and togetherness. And so this has, I think, been so counter to the way we all usually operate. So it really made me feel very touched, which is why I just offered to say hello. But I will admit, just because I've been juggling a lot of Zoom events, that I want to defer to you as to how this works today. I can just listen in, or you can ask questions, or is someone going to kind of moderate things, or do you want me to spiel at all? I mean, I'd love to basically hear from people who have questions about the book or the process of writing it, or any of the people in it. I'm sure you've seen, by the way, that a lot of the people have died in the book, which always makes me feel very responsible, because I wrote it in 2005, and what's nice is that Tablet Magazine, actually, every time that we have a loss, they run that person's chapter, which is just kind of a nice tribute to them, and also just a memory of how they connected Jewishly, because some of these folks, you know, like, for instance, when Joan Rivers died suddenly, you know, people don't know how much her Judaism mattered. So that's one way that the book has also lived on in a very kind of poignant and sad way. Although now, obviously, we're living through a time of much more loss than individual celebrities. So I just want to say I'm sorry for anyone who has anyone sick or anyone who has lost anyone, as I have. This has been a very, very trying and difficult, painful time.
Thank you. Rabbi Muller is going to present our class, basically, and then we thought we'd have you jump in when appropriate.
Great.
We didn't want to take advantage of you, make you prepare anything, so sit back and listen, and then we'll take it from there.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to mute.
Thank you.
All right. Well, greetings, everyone. And first of all, let me just thank you, Abby, for being with us this afternoon. We've been very excited about the possibility of you joining us, and we can't tell you how much it's meant that you're here with us today. We really appreciate it. And if I could just ask you one quick question. I have, ever since I read Deborah Golda and Me, I just loved your mother's writing style, and obviously the apple doesn't fall far from the tree because I've enjoyed your books just as much, and you just have a way of expressing yourself so beautifully. I keep an extra copy on hand of Stars of David and My Jewish Year, just in case I want to share with people, and I have in the past. So I just want to ask you a question right up front. What's the next book you're working on that we can look forward to?
Thank you. And I neglected to thank you, Rabbi Miller, who's been an incredible, I mean, every time I feel like I want to beat myself up, I remember that there are clergy like you who have constantly reaffirmed me, and I need a little less therapy because of you. So thank you. In terms of my mom, I'm so appreciative that you lift her work up. And, you know, it's particularly poignant. She's 81 now. She's writing a book actually called Shonda, which I hope will see the light of day within the next year, which is about Jewish shame, which I think we are all familiar with. Not just guilt, but shame, all the moments in her life where actually the truth was buried because it didn't reflect well on Jews or on the Jewish family. And so that's going to be very interesting for her. And she and I are constantly, obviously, in dialogue, not just about mom and daughter things, but also about Jewish things, particularly in this time. For me, I will say that one of the things that came out of both Stars of David and then my next book, My Jewish Year, which you kindly mentioned, is person after person asked me where God fits in. Where does God fit in? And it's not that God was never mentioned, but as you know, as a rabbi, sometimes in the Jewish community, we're not so comfortable talking about the divine. We don't necessarily have language for it. Sometimes talking about God's love or God's punishment is not necessarily in the vernacular, even though many of us are believers. And so I really wanted to explore the idea of belief and faith. And I'm about to embark on a series about God for the Forward newspaper, interviews that are going to hopefully highlight not just what Jews believe, but actually what does it mean to kind of make God concrete, particularly in this moment of a plague that we're living through and the upheaval, the social upheaval that we've seen with the awakening after George Floyd. And so that's really been eye-opening. And hopefully I will say a little, Ein Hara, I hope that the evil eye doesn't get in the way, that it might eventually become a book. So thank you for asking.
Wow, that is really exciting. God and spirituality is one of my favorite subjects to delve into. So, wow, that I will be looking forward to reading those articles in the Forward, and hopefully that will turn into a book one day as well. About your mother's book, Shonda, of course, the Eskimos have 20 different words for snow, and I guess the Jews have 20 different kinds of words for guilt, shame, humiliation. We're good at that, so that should be very
very true.
Yes. All right. Let's just quickly flash the Jewish identity spectrum up on the screen. I just want to go over that very briefly for anyone who's new to the class today, and just kind of as a review. So we'll just start with that. And here it is. The categories on the right were inspired by Bernard Reisman, a Jewish sociologist and professor at Brandeis University. And this is from the 80s when I saw this Jewish life space that broke down Jewish identity into religion, God, culture, ethnicity, Israel, Zionism, association, community, and anti-Semitism and otherness. Different Jewish people identify with various aspects of these basic five. But this was done 35 years ago. And I felt that there were new aspects of Jewish identity that cropped up in the last generation. So I added some others on the left side. Tradition, heritage, meaning are there any things that you do Jewishly because your parents or your grandparents did that and you want to have Jewish continuity? Many Jews that we know of practice their Judaism through acts of social justice and performing Tikkun Olam to make the world better. There are those Jews who love to study. They go to Parshat HaShavua every week at temple or doing it online. Or as Susan mentioned, the wonderful series that Abby has done with the Torah portion of the week. And then there's ethics, morals, and values. We Jews have contributed not just monotheism to the world, but ethical monotheism. So we have a whole set of ethics, morals, and values that's been the basis of all major religions. And some Jews identify with that. So these are the categories we've used, and that we have looked for clues in each of the chapters that we've read to try to determine and sort of plot out each of the personalities' Jewish identities. So we have 4 very exciting people that we're going to study today. And the first one has a very close connection to our author, Gloria Steinem. Of course, Gloria Steinem is a household name as the world's most famous Jewish feminist and face of the women's movement. And Abby kind of grew up with Gloria because Gloria and her mom and 3 others founded Ms. Magazine in 1972, which was the first feminist periodical with a national readership and a revolutionary agenda. And so Abby had privy to getting to know Gloria through the attending feminist women's seders. And ever since she and her sister were little girls, they were able to participate with Gloria and other well-known Jewish feminists like Congresswoman Bella Abzug. And it was such a vibrant gathering of everyone and anyone who was associated with the women's movement. And these were just very inspiring, uplifting events. And it sort of formed the basis of Gloria's Jewish identity for many years. Gloria is half Jewish on her father's side. And as we've discussed before, in terms of Reform Judaism, you are Jewish if your father was Jewish and your mother is not, if you are raised as a Jew. So this was kind of some of the difficulty that I had in plotting Gloria's Jewish identity, because it's somewhat tenuous. It's almost as though she's a little ambivalent about her Judaism and is kind of looking at it from the outside in. So I struggled a little bit with how to plot out Gloria's Jewish identity, but one thing was for certain: she really connected with the feminist seders that were held every year. And imagine a group of women sitting on pillows, everyone bringing a dish to share, passing a bowl of water around and washing each other's hands. And there's an orange on the Seder plate because some rabbi said once that a woman belongs on the bima as rabbi as much as an orange belongs on a Seder plate. And you may have heard that before. We always had an orange on our Seder plate at my temple. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was a beet instead of a shank bone at the feminist Seder because of vegetarianism. But so all these things that reflected the modern movements of feminism and just sensitivity really took place at these feminist seders, and it was so much a part of Gloria's identity. Her father never really talked about his Judaism very much. Sort of ironically, Gloria got a sense of her Jewishness from her rather unenthusiastic Episcopalian mother, who would always talk about Judaism as a wonderful heritage and a gift and a tradition of social justice and culture. And it must have taken root because Gloria really developed a tremendous social conscience. Not only was she involved in women's empowerment and feminist solidarity, but she is a strong proponent and advocate of racial and economic justice and equality, reproductive freedom, multicultural education, stopping violence that takes place and sexual abuse of women and children, and particularly gun violence. So she's involved in just about every liberal social justice cause. And I have to believe this came from her mother, who espoused the value of Judaism as a social justice movement going all the way back to the prophets. I think that's very important to mention this. Her mother made young Gloria also conscious of the Holocaust. And she felt that she should know that this was going on in the world. So at a very young age, she was exposed to especially the deaths of children. And this really affected her deeply, although she did not connect that it was her people being slaughtered. Again, this sense of tenuous Jewish connection in which she was looking at it from the outside in. But it affected her very deeply, and I think stayed with her for her entire life in terms of the anti-Semitism that Jews were subjected to. She had a brief period in childhood where she kind of had a fundamentalist church exposure. She felt the boys in her neighborhood were a little rough, and that church made men peaceful. So she started going to the Presbyterian church, but eventually got disillusioned because she felt that people were only nice to each other because Jesus wanted it. So that did not last that very long. But in general, she began to become alienated from religious institutions because of their misogynistic tendencies and the fact that women really weren't welcomed as much and given the same leadership roles as men. And she kind of writes a little bit of a stark paragraph where she says, when I'm in a house of worship, I feel like I want to take off my clothes and lie down as a form of protest. And there was a whole paragraph in the book that explains that the church is really the model of a woman, and she was just trying to assert women's authority. But that's how strongly she felt about it. Let me read you an excerpt from the book. She eventually became somewhat exposed to Jewish ethnicity by going to college at Smith College, and she was so taken by the young Jewish girls' connections to their families and especially to their mothers. They would call them every Sunday and tell them, you know, what happened on their date Saturday night. And by this time, Gloria's mother had become mentally ill and dysfunctional, and so she was intrigued by these Jewish women's connections to their mom. And it was fascinating to her and even warm and enviable, but it was alien. Again, looking from the outside in. Here she writes about the high holidays, and this is a pretty funny passage. While I was a freshman, I was going out with a young man in Washington who was Jewish. And that, I think, was my first real understanding, because he was very much a part of the Jewish community. I actually went to a temple once with him. It was one of the high holidays, and they had sold tickets, which I just found completely mind-boggling. It was like getting tickets to a movie. And also, everyone was so talkative and noisy in the congregation. I was used to these very Protestant silent ceremonies, so I was quite shocked that was not the best introduction. So I never quite heard of that. I mean, that's funnier than a Larry David episode of the selling high holiday tickets like going to a movie. But that was the impression that she got from that. She also she became involved by becoming engaged to a Jewish man. His family was very artistic and musically inclined, and Leonard Bernstein would come through their doors, and it was just culturally charged. But she found she couldn't find a place in this Jewish family, and she really wasn't accepted as being Jewish by the family, probably because she didn't have a Jewish mother, which of course matrilineal descent is the main key to who is a Jew. So she knew she knew the marriage wasn't going to work out. And the only way she could get out of it was by telling her fiance's family, you know, I think I want to get married in a church. And they said, that's fine, you can do that, but we're not going to be there. So that's how she got out of the marriage. She knew it was wrong, even though she was madly in love with her Jewish fiance. But she did feel out of place in their orbit. Here's another paragraph I want to read, which was the real first clue, a big clue as to how she connects with Judaism. And I think you'll find this interesting. The stage of my identity today is that I feel like if there's trouble for the Jews, I should be there. But if there's not trouble, I feel like I don't have to worry about it, which is a different level of identity. Because when I see Jews doing well, I don't necessarily kvel, well, she's got to be Jewish, she used the word kvel, in the same way that I do when I see women doing well. But I feel endangered when Jews are endangered. It's like I'm a foul weather friend. Now that is classic identification with anti-Semitism. Jews who really aren't that involved in going to services or coming to temple, but boy, if there's anti-Semitism out there, the forces are garnered and they come out and they support the Jewish people to stand up to their enemies. So that I gave her a lot of anti-Semitism points, because that's the way that she connected with that. Her view on Israel is very different from what we would consider a normative Jewish position. And I had never heard it before. I found it fascinating. She's kind of a critical friend. Now, when we think of a critical friend of Israel, we realize that, you know, someone can criticize the Netanyahu government and without being anti-Zionist. I mean, we're allowed to do that. But this goes a little bit further. Here's what she writes. It's just always seemed to me that nationalism wasn't safe. I don't know why that was. Maybe because people used to say if they get us all in one spot, then they'll really kill us. Some of it was that I didn't believe in nationalism altogether. I've always had an unexplained feeling that the strength of Judaism was not to be tied to national boundaries. It was to be everywhere, to be a culture and a spirituality, not to be a nation state. Wow. She even considered Israel as Hitler's last punishment to the Jews, because that's how much she despised nationalism. And this became a point of contention with her good friend, Letty, and they kind of obviously, disagreed about that because, as Jews, we relate to Israel as a safe haven for the Jews. So I found that particularly interesting, her take on Israel. And finally, she talks a little bit about the association factor, because she readily admits that more than half of her closest friends are Jewish. And here's what she writes about that. She feels more simpatico with Jews because there's a warmth and a vitality. Not that she responds to every Jew who comes along. I'm not convinced that every Jewish person in our crowd in New York has more warmth than every non-Jewish person. Some of them are pretty Episcopalian. She laughs. So I thought that was very humorous as well. So she got good association points, and she got a lot of points with anti-Semitism, as I mentioned. I gave her some points with culture, ethnicity, because of the way she connected with the Jewish Women's Seder. And then finally, the biggest category was for social justice and Tikkun Olam, which we will give her the benefit of the doubt that she got from her mother, who talked about that as part of Judaism. So here it is. And the quote I used from her is, the stage of my identity is that I feel like if there's trouble for the Jews, I should be there. But if there's not trouble, I feel like I don't have to worry about it, which I interpreted. My comments in parentheses are sort of my take on the quote. Gloria admires certain aspects of the Jewish faith, but again, is looking at it from the outside in. And now I'll take any comments or questions. And I hope, Abby, I did Gloria justice. And if there's anything you feel that's important that I left out, please do add.
Rabbi, I don't see any comments or questions. If anybody has one, Susan Pittleman. Oh, Susan, you have to unmute.
Okay. I'm very taken with Gloria Steinem for several reasons. One is that she was the speaker at a women's speaker series that I chaired when I lived in Milwaukee. And when she got off the plane, we got into the van, and right away, there was no small talk. She pulled out a file folder and told us that we, the women of Wisconsin, had a lot of work to do. So she really is focused on getting things done and giving you hints of how to do it. I also followed up on her grandmother, and Abby had mentioned that her grandmother was very involved. Her grandmother, Pauline Perlmutter Steinem, and I looked up it a little bit more, and I found out that she was the president of the Ohio Women's Suffrage Association, in addition to a lot of other things. So I think that Gloria not only got it from her mother, who very much liked her mother-in-law and passed down those values, but she also got it from her grandmother. And I looked up to see what she's doing today, and she's now 86 years old, and she calls herself a hopeaholic, and she's not giving up her torch. She, like all of us, she was quarantined in a New York apartment and recently went to her Santa Monica home. And I found out that she's now being described as part of the pop culture, because there's the movie The Glorias that was at the Sundance Film Festival, Gloria, A Life, an off-Broadway play that was done a few years ago and then just shown again, and Mrs. America, which was a 9-episode miniseries, which I don't think Gloria Steinem really likes so much. But she's still, at 86, she's still going strong and still carrying the torch and still encouraging other women to carry the torch. So hats off to her. And Abby, is there anything, have you?
I wanted to say something.
Okay.
You see me? I wanted to say something.
Lorraine.
Lenore.
Lenore.
Yes, thank you. Well, this is very serendipitous because last night on PBS, I don't know how many of you have seen, it was like a biop of Gloria Steinem. Christine Lottie did it. And I would highly recommend it to you. It's on PBS. Christine Lottie played Gloria Steinem through her whole life. It was in like a circle. They had other characters who came in. I did not get the sense, I knew she was Jewish from the book, but I think in the story of her life, she cared about the underdog. She cared about injustice. She identified very closely with the Black movement and with the women's movement. And of course, she talked about her mom at the end. And at the end of this dramatic presentation, which, as I say, all of you can get on PBS, Gloria Steinem came out, and she looks amazing for 86. So I really enjoyed the rabbi's analysis this morning, and I think it would be worthwhile for anyone who is looking for something to see on TV to look for this. It's called Gloria. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Rabbi, I don't see any else. Anyone else? Maybe let's continue to the next.
Okay.
Wait, Robin Mintz is raising her hand.
Oh, Robin.
Right, I thought Abigail wanted to say something.
Oh, okay. I would thank you, Robin. That's very nice. First, I just want to commend Rabbi Muller because I love the rubric that you've created for identity. I think it's fascinating for anybody, and also you've been very astute in what you highlight from Gloria's chapter. I think what's interesting, particularly since I wrote the book, is that we've seen the strains of criticism around Israel and particularly anti-Semitism on campus really rear its ugly head a lot more since 2005. We've also, obviously, I don't have to tell you all, seen a very alarming spike in anti-Semitic events since 2016. Whether you connect that to Trump or not, I will leave to your own discussions, but it is inescapable that the ADL, I just actually talked to the head of the ADL last week, Jonathan Greenblatt, who reminded me that in their 40-year history of keeping track of anti-Semitic incidents, it was at their highest rate in the years between 2016 and 2018, I believe, or 2019. But one of the things that I think has been hard for me with Gloria, who I feel is very close to my family, is how defending she was of some of those who have criticized Israel. And I think it's because, exactly as Rabbi said, she comes at this from a place of really being uncomfortable with nationalism and in a way conflating, I think, what we would consider Israel pride in our Jewish state with with some of the oppression that is inescapably true about the way Palestinians have been treated. And it's been hard for me personally sometimes to have those conversations with Gloria, but also it's pushed me, I think, in important ways, and should push every Jew in an important way. If some of you may remember the Women's March that I participated in, my mother and my daughter and I all marched in January of 2016 in Washington with the pink hats, and it was really powerful. But what I didn't feel comfortable with were some of the creators of the Women's March who had some anti-Semitic feelings and defended Farrakhan, some of you may remember. And my very strong stance was, I can separate out 1 million women marching for what I think is important for women's rights in this country. I can separate that out with the 3 people who ended up having a lot of infighting about how to manage the march. It didn't stop me from marching, but it was a moment where Gloria was asked kind of in a way to kind of call out some of those folks and, negotiate both her politics of inclusion and, I think, justice with anti-Semitism and what many of us considered to be anti-Semitic rhetoric about a march we believed in. And so I think it's important in a way to, Gloria is, I think, one of the most brilliant people I know, is to kind of not I don't criticize her, but I think that she sparks just the same way that the rabbi highlighted an argument that Gloria and my mom had so many years ago, is to keep having those conversations. And particularly now when we've seen, again, the very important reckoning that our country is doing about race. And many Jews have been uncomfortable with Black Lives Matter in the past, and now have seen that they took out of their platform any of the language around Israel that made us uncomfortable. But these are conversations we need to be having. So it's a long way of saying, I think this Gloria chapter speaks to us even today. And I hope in your future conversations, you're going to tackle some of these very hard questions.
Thank you so much, Abby. We have one more question from Arlene. Arlene, you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay. I recorded the program from that Lenore was talking about. It's the play, and it was on great performances on PBS, and it probably might be repeated again because sometimes they do that late at night sometime. But I didn't get to see the play yet, but that's probably what it stemmed from, was the play, because it wasn't a bio, it was actually a production. And Christina Lott, that's the one that Lenore was talking about. And if anyone wants to find out from me, I'll let you know. But it looks tremendous, it really does.
Arlene, I would just add to that. I saw that. You're absolutely right. That's what it is. It's the play. I was there actually when Gloria, they always had a special guest at the end. Darryl Roth was the producer, and so she invited me and my mother and my sister, and we saw the night that Gloria came out afterwards, and of course the crowd went crazy. But I'm glad Lenore mentioned it because it was very powerful in person. And Gloria does, as Lenore say, look amazing for 86. We just had a birthday for my mom last year. She turned 80, and Gloria came to this very small gathering, and it's just mind-boggling. Like, this is not someone who's had Botox. Let me just say, feminism was good to her. But you're both right. It's extraordinary, and the PBS will repeat it. I'm sure of that.
Thank you so much. Rabbi Mueller, we are going back to you.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I think it's really important because it's Gloria's take on Israel is not just outside the pale. I think a lot of Jewish people have this difficulty dealing with great pride in the state of Israel, but at the same time, some of the discomfort with policies regarding the Palestinians. And some of that is going to come out in Norman Lear when we get to him in a few minutes. So we're going to continue now with our second personality. And Mark Spitz is one of Rabbi Miller's favorites, and we're sorry he couldn't join us on the class today. He had another commitment, but hopefully he'll get to watch the recording a little bit later. The opening statement of this chapter is no longer true. Mark Spitz was the first and remains the only Olympic athlete to win 7 gold medals in 1 year, 1972. So my question to you is, all right, who broke his record? Anybody know?
Michael Phelps.
You are correct. And that was in Beijing in 2008. He won 8 gold medals. So that was right off the bat. But the record held for a long time. Mark Spitz was certainly one of my heroes. I was a college freshman. I just started, and I think I tried to grow a mustache in 1972. I was 17 years old. It was not pretty, so I abandoned that. But I think every Jewish young man wanted to be Mark Spitz in 1972. He was a great hero. There was a mixture of irony and tragedy with this great feat that he accomplished. The irony of a Jew winning 7 gold medals in Germany. And think back to 1936 with the Olympics of Jesse Owens. This was Germany's coming out party to demonstrate the great power and of the Aryan race, and that Aryans were superior to all other people, particularly minorities. And look what happens. Jesse Owens wins 4 gold medals, and that's how it started. So, but this was the irony of a Jew winning all these gold medals in Germany, just a few decades after the Holocaust. And this was 15 miles from Dachau. And this was combined with, of course, the tragedy of the 9 Israeli athletes who were kidnapped the same night that Mark Spitz won his 7 gold medals and tragically were killed the next day. So you almost have a transition. This was the first really terrorist act on American soil, and it shocked the entire world that something like this could happen. And so the brutality of Nazism was literally changed to terrorism and in almost one night. And this was a transition to the terrorist era. So Mark Spitz, all of a sudden, not only was adulated for his performance of the gold medals, but now his Jewish identity came into the forefront, and he was being bombarded by questions from the press and Jewish groups about what is it like, how do you feel as a Jew about what has transpired with this tragedy. And so rather than standing on the medals podium to honor his great accomplishment, he was ferreted out of the country because he was in possible danger, and he didn't find out about the massacre until the next morning in London when he was with his agent and read about it in the newspapers, and he was absolutely just shocked. And during the time, President Nixon debated over whether to give Mark Spitz a congratulatory phone call. And you would think, well, he must have vacillated because he didn't know how would you congratulate a Jewish athlete for this wonderful achievement in the wake of such a horrible tragedy. Well, that wasn't the reason at all. And there's a tape that was released in 2003 with H.R. Haldeman. They were having a discussion. Richard Nixon did not call Mark Spitz because he was a Jewish Democrat. He figured if he's Jewish, he must be a Democrat. And if you'll recall, in September of 1972, it was 2 months before the election with George McGovern running for president. And Nixon did not want to give any sort of praise to a Jew who might vote Democratic. And it was ridiculous because Mark Spitz had been voting as a Republican ever since he was eligible to vote. So that was kind of a humorous incident. Mark had his bar mitzvah December 7th, 1963, 22 years after Pearl Harbor. And he said that he made a mistake in his bar mitzvah. He repeated a line of the Haftarah twice, and only 2 people knew about it. So before I could get to who they were, I figured it must be the rabbi and God. Well, it was the rabbi and his grandfather. But I guess he was pretty hard on himself. That probably comes from his discipline to be a champion swimmer. Because if that was the only mistake he made, I'd say he did pretty well. He grew up in California and Hawaii, and by age 2, his father put him in the swimming pool. And I remember my favorite show as a kid growing up in the early 60s was Sea Hunt, and I remember Lloyd Bridges. He had his kids, Bo and Jeff, in a swimming pool when they were 2 years old. Of course, they didn't become competitive championship swimmers. They became great actors. But I guess that's what you have to do when you want to achieve greatness. Let me read you just an excerpt about his experience in Germany. Mark started competitive swimming before he was 10 and was named the world's best 10 and under swimmer. At 15 in 1965, he went to Tel Aviv for the Maccabi Games, an annual contest created to celebrate and encourage Jewish young people in sports, and he won 4 gold medals. A year later, Spitz went to compete in Germany. I asked him if it felt strange to be there as a Jew. And he, in quote, in 1966, I was 16 and the war had only been over for 20 years. The thought did occur to me that anyone I met in their 40s could have been a Nazi at one time. It was weird to walk into a bakery and know that 20 odd years ago, I would have been pulled into the street and shot. Of course, your humor about that situation is a lot different when you're 16 or 17 because nothing happens to a 17-year-old. My wife and I were in Berlin in 2013. It was the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht. We went on a rabbinical mission, And it was just mind-boggling. We were treated like royalty. We were taken into the office of the German Secretary of Defense. And Germany has this sense of bending over backwards to recognize that we're a different generation. We're not the generation that committed the Holocaust, and we want to make amends. They could not have treated us any nicer. However, at the same time, as Abigail mentioned, the rise in anti-Semitism, especially in Europe, has been pernicious in the last few years. And really, to be honest, you are taking a risk if you walk down the streets of Berlin today wearing a yarmulke, because you could be attacked. And that's just the way, that's the situation that you face in Germany today. The government absolutely wants to make amends, but not all of the citizenry is in the same place. All right, in 1985, Mark carried the torch at the Maccabi Games, and this just broke my heart. Behind him, the 3 little girls were trailing him. They were 13 years old. These 3 little girls were in their mommy's womb on the night of the massacre of the Israeli athletes, because their fathers were 3 of those who were killed. They were born several months later, and they grew up without a father, and they were selected to follow Mark Spitz at the 1985 Maccabi Games. That just breaks your heart. But he embraced his Jewishness, but admitted it had absolutely no impact on his swimming. And his swimming had no impact on his Judaism. Although, as I did mention, he was a role model for young Jewish men who felt that, well, here's a Jewish kid who can make it to the top. Why can't I? Because the typical image of the pale Jewish student studying in the yeshiva all day who has no athletic skill at all. Well, we've been inundated with that in artwork and books, and it's just not true, because, and this is the quote I use from Mark Spitz, being a Jew is not something that limits you physically and athletically. And he was asked, well, why are there so few Jewish sports stars? He said, because there are so few Jewish people in the world. It's that simple. It's a percentage. Are Jews doctors and lawyers in greater percentages than their numbers? Well, of course they are, but that's because Jewish parents pushed them to excel. And the very fact is, this is not a matter of genetics, but it's the environment. And just as in sports, in academics, it's what your parents push you to do that gives you a greater chance to excel and succeed. And that is how he feels. So any Jewish person can excel in anything that they want. It's a matter of putting their mind to it. This was gratifying. He talked about his involvement with Temple, particularly the Stephen Wise Temple in Los Angeles, the congregation that's known as the Shul with a pool, because they actually do have a swimming pool. His sons became bar mitzvahed there, and here's the excerpt that I want to read to you. When you're around a community that embraces religion, you embrace it more too. I've been participating in this in a big way. I'm a big proponent now. I used to hate going to High Holy Day services. As soon as I got there, I was counting the minutes till I could leave. Now I look forward to going. Maybe I'm older and not as fast-paced as before. Also, I'm an example for my kids. I enjoy it. So that gave him some points in the religion category. And he also got points in the association category, because for Mark, marrying a Jewish woman was important. Let me just read that to you. He's been married to a Jewish girl, Susie Weiner, for 32 years. Early on, before I even got married, I thought about how I would raise children if I were to marry outside the religion. How would they identify with who they are? And would it be good to have a split situation where they were raised with both religions involved? I realized that that wasn't something I would be comfortable doing. So perhaps it's prejudiced, but I focused on marrying someone Jewish. All right, let's flash up the JIS for Mark Spitz. Being a Jew is not something that limits you physically and athletically. We can represent our people as proudly in the sports world as we can in the academic or professional arena. That's my take on him. So he got some good points for religion and God, because he belongs to a congregation and attends, at least for the High Holy Days, if not more. Association points he gets because of his importance in feeling that he should be marrying someone Jewish in order to raise a Jewish family. And the anti-Semitism otherness because of what happened in Munich, and then the fact that he felt, kind of pushed aside for the Olympics in 1984 in Los Angeles and 1996 in Atlanta, when he was not selected to come in and carry the torch or to participate in any way at the opening ceremonies. And he felt that could have been because he was Jewish. So he felt that little bit of sting of anti-Semitism. Whether it was true or not doesn't really matter, because that's the way he felt about it. So he got points, some more percentages for anti-Semitism for that reason. So that's how I divided up Mark Spitz, and we'll take any comments or questions. I do want to get to Norman Lear, so.
We don't have anything at the moment, so I would say let's keep going so that we get through everyone.
Okay. In 1971, and I was a junior in high school, and my friends and I would get together every Saturday night for dinner, and then we would watch All in the Family. It was absolutely not to be missed. We did not go out until after All in the Family was over. It was either at 8 o'clock or 8:30, I don't remember, but we didn't get in the car until we watched that show. It was a classic in its day. We all remember Archie Bunker as a racist, sexist, anti-Semite, but I have to qualify that because he really wasn't an anti-Semite. Archie Bunker was what I call a philo-Semite. What's a philo-Semite? Philo, it comes from the word love. And it's a person who doesn't like Jews, but it's somebody who feels that they need Jewish people when the going gets tough. You're going in for surgery in the hospital, you want a Jewish doctor. You have a legal case against you, you want a Jewish lawyer. You may even want to go to a Jewish dentist because you feel they do a better job. So there was an episode where Archie got in a little car accident and his arm was in a sling, and he wanted to fake an injury so he could get some insurance money. So he called the law firm of Rabinowitz, or whatever it was, and he wanted a Jewish lawyer. So who did they send out? They sent out some blonde-haired kid, and you're not Jewish. He said, well, because of the neighborhood you live in, we didn't think you were Jewish, and so we sent the house goy. That was in the episode. It must have been hysterical to watch it. I don't remember. But so he was disappointed. He wanted a Jewish lawyer. That is a philo-Semite. And Lear supports that because he used a lot of rhetoric. I mean, he was a big talker, Archie Bunker, but he had no violent tendencies and never actually carried out any anti-Semitic acts. So I would call him a philo-Semite and not an anti-Semite. Norman Lear is 97 years old. He's still living in New Haven, Connecticut. My wife and I had the privilege of seeing him speak at Chautauqua some years ago. He was probably in his late 80s, and he was absolutely spry and energetic as ever. He has been prolific in producing all of these television series that we know and love. Maude, Sanford and Son, The Jeffersons, Good Times, Mary Hartman, but he's also been quite prolific in producing a family. He has 3 wives, or he had 3 wives, 6 kids, 5 grandchildren, and presumably great-grandchildren today. He was 74 years old when his youngest twins were born, and he kvelled when his 15-year-old son, or his son Benjamin, had his bar mitzvah, which really thrilled him. But he is not religious in any way. He does not find temple services inspiring. As a matter of fact, he likes gospel services more than temple because they are uplifting and inspiring. So that is how he feels about his religion. He does not identify with religion in any way, but he still feels very Jewish. And this was important because this is something I want to bring out. As a rabbi, I used to judge people who did not come to high holiday services. Okay, you don't want to come during the year, I'll forgive that. But any Jew who doesn't come to the high holidays is not a Jew. And I used to feel that way until I realized, who am I to judge? Some people have different aspects of how they express their identities. And going to high holiday services may not be one of them. And that doesn't make them any less Jewish than you or I or anyone who goes every single week. What Norman Lear identifies with are memories from his grandparents. And these are so strong that he has the greatest feeling for Judaism that anyone could ever have. I want to read you just how he describes his memories. what I want to say is that the memories of my grandmother, Hannah Rachel, and all the gorgeous little fresh to this country Jews mean the most to me. Because you see, it's only my memory. My kids don't have those memories, and you can't pass those on. They die with me. My memories of Friday nights with the spanking white tablecloth and the candles and so forth. In other words, family togetherness, which he connects to Jewish scenes of his childhood, makes him want to keep certain rituals afloat. I could cry remembering how my grandfather took an hour and a half for the Passover ceremony that used to bore the expletive out of us, he says with a laugh, but now I reflect on it, how sweet it was. And then he says, eating my grandmother's matzo balls, just remembering her stooped over the oven and her soup, the smell, his eyes water. I cry easily. Jews are wet. I like that. There are wet people and dry people. Jews are wetter. And I was so grateful to get this passage because we didn't really have much in the tradition heritage category. Not many people expressed that they do Jewish things because of their grandparents. And Norman Lear, this was the essence of his Jewish identity. And it was so good because we needed someone to reflect that category. And he did in a beautiful way. He was also very aware of anti-Semitism. And he describes his brand of Judaism as social consciousness. And he writes, I will say this about my own Jewishness. I was inordinately aware of anti-Semitism in the world. I listened to Father Charles Coughlin on the air as a kid. I don't remember how old I was. And I listened to a fellow by the name of Carl McIntyre out of New Jersey, who was a Protestant Jew hater. And I had a nose for anti-Semitism unlike any other. People for the American Way came directly out of that nose. And of course, People for the American Way was the organization he founded, safeguarding constitutional freedoms, just watching out for any kind of trampling on democracy and efforts to try to define someone's religious faith based on their politics, like some of the televangelists that we saw in the 80s, like Jimmy Swaggart and Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell. So that was a reaction to that, People for the American Way. So he's done his job. Let's flash up the identity spectrum, please. He, in the TV shows, he raised all kinds of social issues, but there were that was really connected to his sense of Jewishness, and that's so important. He had the sense of anti-Semitism from how he grew up with being exposed to these voices in the 1930s. He has association with Judaism. And I'm trying to remember the connection for that. Oh, because he has great pride in Jewish accomplishments. Remember, one of the rubrics of association is that whenever you see a Jewish person on TV and you go, oh, that person's Jewish, you feel that sense of pride. I put that in the association category. So I gave that to him because he said that others have expressed the enormous pride in the contributions that Jewish people have made anywhere one cares to look, Lear says, except perhaps ice hockey. But medicine, science, music, comedy, my God. And that's how I divided up his spectrum. And look at the quote, what I want to maintain are the memories of my grandmother and my grandfather. Who among us has no memories of parents, grandparents, rituals that we grew up with that stay with us? That's all part of our tradition, heritage that we want to pass on to future generations. All right, we have very few minutes left, and I don't want to miss Diane von Furstenberg. Let's quickly.
Rabbi Muller, because I'm afraid I have to go, and I want to thank you all so much. But I would, first of all, you've got an amazing teacher in Rabbi Muller. This is amazing. Yes, applause. I see Jane applauding. And I know none of you have ever been bored or missed high holiday services at Chapel Shalom. But I just wanted to just add quickly to Norman Lear. Some of you may know that Stars of David was adapted for the off-Broadway stage, actually by the same producer who produced the Gloria play that Lenore mentioned, Darrell Roth. So I was lucky enough to watch these chapters become songs, and each chapter, not all of them, but the ones that were chosen were each written by a different composer. The Norman Lear chapter was written by Sheldon Harnick, who you know co-wrote Fiddler on the Roof. So if any of you have access to find that album online, you can always look up Stars of David and you'll hear the Norman Lear song that was written by Sheldon Harnick. It's pretty wonderful. And thank you all for inviting me on today. I'm sorry I can't stay. Wishing you safety.
Bye, thank you. We look forward to reading your next book. And if you get yourself with some free time, we'd love to have Stars of David too.
Oh, thanks you. I also just want to come to Naples. So if anybody wants to invite me.
Love you.
Okay.
Thank you, Abby. It was
Thank you so much, Abby.
Bye.
thrilled to have you.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rabbi Mueller.
Before Rabbi Mueller continues with the final personality, I want to let everyone know that we are going to go a few minutes past today. If you need to leave, I understand this session, like all the others, is recorded. So if you need to leave, please know that we'll be sending out a recording following the end of the session. And for those that are needing to leave, I wanted to make a quick announcement so that you don't miss it, that we have received feedback that many of our participants would like to take a deeper look at the Jewish identity spectrum, to look at it in a personal way, to see what are our Jewish identities, how would we divide up our own Jewish personality. So we are looking to offer a follow-up series where we would have an opportunity really to look inward, and that will be coming out in August. So more information to come. Interested, please let me know, and we'll make sure we get that out to you very soon. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rabbi Mueller to continue with the fourth personality.
All right, this will be the world according to Diane von Furstenberg in 3 minutes. All right. She is 73 years old, born in Brussels, December 31st, 1946. And Diane von Furstenberg we know as a successful fashion designer, style setter, and queen of chic in New York City, but she had never talked about her mother being a Holocaust survivor until 1981, when she was awarded the Woman of Achievement Award at the Anti-Defamation League. She didn't know from the ADL, but the truth just poured out once she got on the podium. She talked about 18 months before she was born, her mother was in Auschwitz. That's when she realized she had an obligation to talk about it. She wrote a book called Diane, A Signature Life. And she talks a lot about her mother, Lily, who rarely talked about the camps during her childhood, and even had her tattoos removed because she just didn't know how to answer people who would remark on them and ask what were they, what was this meaning of them, and what was it like going through the camps. She didn't want to deal with it because she would only talk about the good things, the camaraderie in the camps. So Diane had no sense of being Jewish growing up other than that. And she was born right after the war. So in that time, many survivors often disengaged from their Judaism because of what they experienced with the horrors of the Holocaust. They just couldn't talk about it. So I have my first excerpt. The Holocaust has shaped my character from inception. I read her that quote. Well, yes, she says, it's very much who I was. My mother was a total miracle. She weighed 49 pounds at the end of the war. She was not supposed to be alive, but she did make it. She survived. She married my father. She wasn't supposed to have a child, but I was born healthy 18 months later, a total miracle. Everybody comes with a certain DNA. That was my DNA. So my responsibility or duty or thankfulness means that I have to take that energy and live it and be thankful for it. So yes, I do think it makes me very much who I am. Diane absorbed her mother's resilience, and she needed it because she went through a divorce from her first husband. She had her business plummet in the 1980s. She got tongue cancer in 1994. But she learned from her mother to deal with whatever life throws at you. Fear was never an option, and it was the best gift that her mother ever could have gave her. She became involved in fundraising for the Holocaust Museum in Washington in April 1993. At the opening, she took her mother and 2 kids, and it was like taking a victory lap for her mother. So we'll read you this excerpt. I held her small hand tightly as we walked quickly through the original gate of Auschwitz with its sign, Arbeit macht frei, work makes one free. I did not want her to break down. The 4 of us were silent as we walked through the museum, keeping our feelings under control. My mother's example had taught us not to give in to sorrow. And that really, again, is the lesson that she gave. She had like Gloria Steinem, who had kind of a different view on Israel. Diane has a different take on intermarriage. And I thought that was kind of interesting. She's a proponent of intermarriage across all backgrounds. I think the more people mix, the better we are. It's better for the blood. People look better. I like that. So that's somewhat of an alternative view of intermarriage. And she does have some religious identity as well. It's not all about the Holocaust. My children were actually christened because of my husband, but I don't like religion. I think it's destructive. I believe in God. I have my own personal relationship with God. She goes to synagogue once a year. Yom Kippur is something I do alone with nobody else because I believe that my relationship with God is mine and mine only, and I do fast. I do that. So the quote I attributed to her, let's flash up the identity spectrum. The Holocaust has shaped my character from inception. Whatever happens, my mother always told me, you just deal with it and turn it around. Fear is not an option. Wonderful advice for us in dealing in these difficult times. And I wrote as a comment, it's important to develop a survivalist mentality so that even in the worst of circumstances, you can always find a silver lining. And I'd like to say for this book discussion, the silver lining has been the ability for all of us to connect virtually. And having our special guest, having Abigail Pogrebin today would never have happened if we weren't doing these virtual programs. So I think that is the silver lining of these classes. And you can see how I divided up the identity for Diane von Furstenberg. 90% anti-Semitism because of her exposure to her mother being a survivor. And then she gets some religion points also because she goes to high holiday services. So that's really the summary of all of our guests for our personalities for today. We did create something very special. We wanted to show you the composite Jewish identity spectrum for all 16 of the people we have studied over the last 4 weeks. And here it is. And I have to thank Robin for her fabulous work with this. You know, all through my rabbinate, I never got to do what I call corporate charts. And you know, every time you see a corporate presentation on television, and all the charts are so beautifully organized, and I never had that in adult education. It's a Jewish temple. But Robin did this these beautiful pie charts, and now I feel like, yes, I finally got the beautiful graphs that I've always longed for. So thank you, Robin, for the excellent job that you did with this. This is a fascinating graph because it shows what percentage each of the categories took as an aggregate for all 16 personalities. So in other words, what were the priorities of the people we've studied in terms of their Jewish identity? You see 3 major categories here, which are not too surprising. Culture, ethnicity had 17%, association and community 12%, and look at anti-Semitism and otherness. Almost a quarter of the pie chart is taken up with that. So we have to ask this question, and you look at the other categories, the typical traditional categories of Jewish identity, religion and God and study and learning and tradition and heritage only got 3%. And the fact that of our history, the fact we've survived, again, not very much. So what does this pie chart reveal? Maybe it's just a glimpse of the 16 people we studied. Can we extrapolate and say that it would be much different if we looked at all 62 people in the book? Can we say that this is a representative sample of American Jewry? Or somehow does becoming famous and well-known in American culture somehow force you to subvert or cover over your Jewish identity because you may feel that that could compromise your success? For example, people who changed their names, like Jason Alexander. He changed it from J Rosenbaum or whatever it was. But so these are some of the questions we're looking at and want to explore in more detail when we continue looking at this in terms of our own personal stories. But I think it's very revealing to see that ethnicity and association and anti-Semitism are the key factors that were the identities of the personalities we studied. And to me, that's a little concerning of a trend. Where's the study? Where's the religion? How is Judaism going to survive in the next century if all that we do is eat lox and bagels and come together after anti-Semitic events? So those are some of the questions I posed to you to think about. And I did want to ask you, were there any personalities that were interesting to you more than others, or some comments that some people made that surprised you? Just in the few remaining minutes we have, I thought I would open that up to letting you talk about who were the people that moved you the most in our study these past 4 weeks.
I don't see any hands raised. Oh, we've got Robin to start us off. Great.
I don't have any particular personality. I was just so disappointed that it seemed like everybody who is famous, the majority are intermarried. And it was hard to keep that Judaism, except for Mark Spitz, who knew he wanted to marry someone Jewish, married someone Jewish, grew up with Jewish. He seemed like the idyllic American Jewish family. Everyone else struggled and was, I was just really disappointed that that's the way the world, the people who represent Jewish people in the world have to be.
Well, you're right. You're absolutely right. But what I noticed is that a lot of those feelings of not having their Jewishness important to them was in their formative years. Dustin Hoffman, Steven Spielberg as two examples. And they were actually embarrassed by their Jewishness, and they were married several times, but they ended up raising Jewish families and having children bar bat mitzvah. And in their later years, their Judaism became more important. So that was kind of the saving grace to me, that eventually they realized how important their Judaism was to them. It's sort of like it's never too late.
Next will be Susan Pittleman. Susan, you're muted.
Okay. I just thought it was fascinating. I thought that your Jewish identity spectrum really helped to make us look at these different personalities in different ways. I was excited when I found out that Leonard Nimoy's Vulcan symbol was based on the traditional rabbinical blessing symbol. And I think the thing that troubled me the most was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I feel really bad that that her otherness and her being left out came from the Jewish people. The fact that she wasn't able to join the synagogue under her own name, the fact that she wasn't able to participate in a minyan, and that she really doesn't identify as Jewish. Well, she does a little bit, but she certainly stands up for justice allowed to pursue. But I felt really bad, personally felt bad that she felt that way about Judaism. But I really enjoyed all the discussions. So thank you, Rabbi, so very much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
It's Bobby.
Oh, okay. Bobby?
Oh, okay. I wanted to say that, well, thank you, Rabbi, of course. But it seemed like so many of the people that we learned about, it was later on in life that their Judaism came out. There was an article the other day that I just saw. I didn't read it fully, but there was an article in the magazine called Moment about how, when you're young, you don't really care that much, but as you get older, it is more important, your Judaism. And I think we found that with the majority of the stars that you talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I think as we are concerned about the next generation coming up, we see a much less affiliation among the millennial generation, and maybe that will apply when they start raising families, and maybe they will become much more connected to their Judaism. So I think, yeah, the book has a hopeful tone, and it seems to be that when you're young, your Judaism is somewhat peripheral to your life, but as you get older, you realize how central the values that Judaism espouses become connected to the values that we have and what's really important in life. So I think that was a positive takeaway from the book. Let me ask you this. Was there anyone who you feel could have been in the book or should have been in the book who got left out? I know that my wife mentioned a few, like Larry David, Barbara Streisand. Were there some people you would have liked to have seen talked about?
Rabbi Mueller, we had Jane Perman was waiting to ask a question. I'm not sure if that was in relation to this or not.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Okay, no, I don't really have a question. I was going to thank you. I was going to say it would be great to go on with the discussion. I'm one of the people that like that idea. I think there's, you know, our culture, or North American culture, which venerates, you mentioned that, you know, some of their reactions could be because of their celebrity and the need to stay in the public eye and not be too Jewish. And I'm looking at all the participants here, and that we're all part of Temple Shalom. And I would venture to say that, we have a lot of different backgrounds as well. But I know for me, I'm grateful all the time that I came from a family that, that valued Jewish study, that sent me to religious school and so on. And we can talk about that more, but I think there's a big difference between, Jews who embrace Judaism today and some of the celebrities who had very different needs. It's interesting to know about them. It was fascinating. And I never gave it a thought about who should be in the next book, but we could probably come up with some ideas. So thank you again, Rabbi Mueller.
So
it's been great.
But what the composite revealed, I worry about our future if all we're going to be identified with is culture and association and anti-Semitism. We've got to somehow figure out a way to increase the commitment to religion, text studies, justice, and ethics. That's the challenge for the next generation. Okay, it's 1:15. I think our time is up. So thank you all so much for participating. I have really enjoyed this book discussion, and as I thank Robin, I do want to thank Susan Pittleman for all the behind-the-scenes work that she did organizing this, and Rabbi Boxman. You just did a wonderful job making this class so smooth in terms of the way it was run and the way we reached out to everyone, and it was just a wonderful experience. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you in August.
Thank you. Wait, Rabbi Mueller, don't leave because Marcy Cotton had a comment. Marcy, do you want to unmute? Okay.
Unmute. Okay. I wanted to thank you, and I look forward to your session and seminar on how to do the Jewish wheel of